My boss got my girlfriend fired after she rejected him. I waited 2 years, found the evidence he thought was hidden, and watched him lose everything. Then they gave me his job. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Story Zone. Hit that subscribe button right now because this one is going to take you on a ride. This is not a story about someone who blew up in the moment and paid for it. This is a story about patience, the specific, grinding, quiet kind of patience that most people cannot sustain, that feels impossible when the rage is fresh and the injustice is right in front of your face. It is a story about a man who thought the rules did not apply to him, a rumor that turned out to be the truest thing anyone in that office ever said, and a smile that ended up costing one person everything and giving another person exactly what he deserved. My name is Daniel. I am 38 years old now. This happened several years ago, and I am going to tell you every single part of it. I want to start with the company because the company matters for everything that comes after. I worked at a mid-sized corporate office, the kind of place that takes itself seriously, with a formal org structure, a full HR department, and a thick employee handbook that people actually had to read and sign. It was, by the standards of the industry, a professional environment, which is a polite way of saying that the rules were real and the consequences for breaking them were supposed to be real too. The company had a strict moral clause in every employment contract. It also had a formal relationship disclosure policy. If 2 employees were in a romantic relationship, both parties had to notify HR, file documentation, and acknowledge the policy in writing. No exceptions, no informal arrangements, no just keep it quiet and it will be fine. You filed the paperwork or you were in breach of your contract. I mention this not to complain about it. I actually respected it. I filed the paperwork. Every form, every acknowledgement, every piece of documentation the policy required. I did it properly because I believed in doing things properly and because the relationship I was disclosing was one I intended to keep. What I did not fully appreciate at the time was that the same company with all these rules about employee conduct employed a man who had been violating the spirit of every one of them for years and had never once faced a consequence. That man was my manager. His name was Dennis. I need to describe Dennis carefully because I think it is important that you understand he was not a cartoon villain. He was not obviously monstrous in ways that were easy to name and report. He was something more difficult than that. He was effective. He was good at his job in the narrow sense of producing results that his own managers valued, and he was exceptional at managing upward, which is the corporate skill that matters most when you are trying to be untouchable. Above him, Dennis was charming, reliable, a safe pair of hands. Below him, Dennis was something else entirely. He was a type A personality in the most extreme version of that description. Everything had to be controlled. Every project, every timeline, every person in his team, Dennis needed his hands on all of it, not because he was detail-oriented in a productive way but because control was the point. He micromanaged not out of anxiety but out of preference. He liked being the person who decided things. He liked people needing him. He liked the particular power that comes from being the one who can say yes or no to everything. He took credit for other people's work with the ease of someone who had been doing it for so long it no longer registered as taking. If a project succeeded, Dennis had guided it. If a presentation landed well, Dennis had shaped the thinking behind it. The people who actually did the work understood what was happening. The people above Dennis saw a manager who consistently delivered. The gap between those two perceptions was where Dennis lived, and he was very comfortable there. He created stress deliberately. Not always loudly, sometimes it was quiet, a comment delivered in passing that you spent the rest of the day turning over, a deadline moved without notice, a question asked in a meeting that was designed not to get information but to make you feel exposed. Dennis understood that keeping people slightly off balance kept them focused on him, and keeping people focused on him was how he maintained control. He had been doing this for years. He was very good at it. He was also married. His wife Sandra also worked at the company in a different department, and by all accounts she was a decent person who deserved better than what she had. Everyone in the office knew that Dennis was unfaithful. It was not a secret exactly. It was one of those open facts that people know and nobody says out loud because saying it out loud requires doing something about it, and nobody wanted to be the person who did something about Dennis. He had survived everything. Every whisper, every near miss, every situation that should have caught up with him. Dennis was still there, still smiling, still untouchable. I had worked under Dennis for 2 years before any of this happened. 2 years of watching him operate, of learning his patterns, of filing away the specific ways he treated people and the specific ways he got away with it. I was not plotting anything during those 2 years. I was just paying attention, the way you pay attention to someone you do not fully trust, storing information without knowing yet what it will be useful for. Maya worked at one of our other offices, about 4 hours away by car. We met at a regional company conference, one of those 2-day events where people from different locations all end up in the same hotel, attending the same sessions, eating the same catered food, making the kind of conversation that sometimes stays professional and sometimes becomes something else. With Maya, it became something else. We talked for most of the first evening, and I drove home 2 days later thinking about her in the way you think about someone when you already know but are not ready to say it yet. We stayed in contact. The contact became regular. The regular contact became something neither of us was describing as casual anymore. When it became clear that this was serious, I went to HR. I filed every form the relationship disclosure policy required. I documented that we worked in different offices, different departments, had no direct reporting relationship, no overlap in responsibilities. I acknowledged the policy. I signed everything. The HR coordinator who processed my paperwork actually smiled and said it was refreshing to see someone take the process seriously. I did not tell her that I took it seriously partly because I worked for a man who I knew did not take anything seriously, and I had no intention of giving Dennis any ammunition. Maya was sharp, quicker than most people in a room, the kind of quick that shows up as humor before it shows up as intelligence. So you are already laughing before you realize you have just been shown something true. She was warm without being soft. She had opinions and she stated them, and she did not need you to agree, but she expected you to engage. She made me better at thinking by making me defend my thinking. I was more serious about her than I had been about anything personal in years. The distance was hard. 4 hours is not an impossible distance, but it is not easy either, and we were doing it properly, planning trips, taking turns, building the kind of relationship that requires actual effort instead of proximity. I was happy in a way that felt different from other kinds of happy. Settled. Like something had clicked into a place it was always supposed to be. The rumor came from a coworker named Pete. Pete was the kind of person every office has, deeply plugged into every current of information moving through the building, a natural archivist of other people's business, genuinely harmless but constitutionally incapable of sitting on anything interesting. If something happened at that company, Pete knew about it within 48 hours and would tell you about it within 49. He found me in the break room one afternoon and delivered it in the low, slightly thrilled tone he used for things he considered significant. Apparently Dennis had a hobby. He photographed himself with women. His words were conquests, which tells you everything about Dennis's framing of his own behavior, and he kept the prints. Not digital files, not on his phone, not in any cloud storage that could be accessed or leaked accidentally. Physical photographs, developed and printed, stored somewhere in his office because keeping them at home with Sandra was obviously not an option. And the part that made me set down my coffee cup, he showed them around. Not to everyone, not publicly, but to certain men on the floor, selected with the specific calculation of someone who wants an audience for his own mythology. He pulled them out like a collector showing rare cards. Look what I have. Look what I do. I looked at Pete for a moment. Then I said something like, "That sounds like exactly the kind of story that gets better every time someone tells it." Pete shrugged. He said he had heard it from 2 different people independently. He was not saying it was definitely true. He was saying it was the kind of thing that, with Dennis, you could not entirely rule out. I filed it away. I did not believe it exactly. I did not disbelieve it either. I thought, if it is true, it is the most Dennis thing I have ever heard. And then I went back to work. The company held an annual dinner every spring, a proper event, held at a hotel ballroom downtown, partners and managers and their guests, formal enough that people dressed up, social enough that people actually enjoyed it. I had been to it twice before, both times alone. This year I asked Maya. She was hesitant. Not about going with me, about going at all. Being seen together publicly at a work event felt different from filing paperwork with HR. Paperwork was administrative. A company dinner was social, visible, the kind of thing that gets talked about. She worked at another office, but she knew enough about corporate environments to know that being noticed had consequences you could not always predict. I reassured her. We had done everything right. We had filed everything. There was nothing informal or hidden about our relationship from the company's perspective. It was fully disclosed and fully documented. We were not doing anything wrong. She agreed, eventually, in the way she agreed to things she was not entirely sure about, by deciding to trust my read of the situation while reserving the right to say I told you so if she turned out to be correct. She was more beautiful that night than I had ever seen her. I am aware that is a thing people say, but I mean it in the specific way. She was wearing a deep green dress and she had done something different with her hair, and when I picked her up at her hotel room I stood in the doorway for a moment just looking. She laughed at my expression. I told her we were going to be late and she said that was my fault. We were not late. We walked in together and I watched the room respond to her the way rooms respond to certain people, not loudly, not all at once, but perceptibly. People noticed. Colleagues I had worked with for years came over in a way they had not when I had attended alone. There were handshakes and introductions and genuine warmth, and more than a few people pulled me aside at some point in the evening to say some version of how did you manage that, delivered in the affectionate way that means they were happy for me. I felt something I had not expected to feel at a work event. Proud. Just genuinely, simply proud. Dennis found us within the first hour. He appeared at my shoulder during a conversation I was having with a colleague, inserted himself smoothly the way Dennis always inserted himself into things, and turned his attention to Maya with the full force of his social charm. Handshake. Eye contact. The practiced warmth of someone who knows how to make a first impression. I introduced her. And I have thought about this moment many times since, about the specific stupidity of what I did next. I mentioned conversationally that she worked at the other office. Dennis's expression did not change. He said, "Really? That's interesting." He said it pleasantly, in the tone of polite small talk. We moved on to other conversation. He excused himself after a few minutes. But he did not leave us alone. For the rest of the evening, in the peripheral way that you notice without being able to point to, Dennis was watching her. Not obviously. Not in a way I could confront or name. Just present, oriented, the way a compass needle orients without being asked to. I caught it twice, once when he was standing with a group across the room and I tracked his eye line. Once when Maya went to get a drink and I watched Dennis shift position almost imperceptibly to maintain his sight line. I did not say anything to Maya that night. I did not want to worry her. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Dennis watched everything and everyone, that this was just how he operated in social situations. I told myself this with the confidence of someone who does not quite believe what he is telling himself. The next morning Dennis stopped by my desk. He had a coffee in one hand and the particular relaxed posture he adopted when he wanted to seem casual while being anything but. He asked how the rest of my evening had been. I said fine. He nodded, looked at something on my desk, and then said it. I have to ask, what did you do? Get her drunk? He delivered it with a smirk. The tone was jokey, the kind of thing a certain type of man says and then waves off as banter if you react badly. But the message underneath was precise. She is out of your league and I have noticed her and I want you to know that I have noticed her. I looked at him for a moment. I said something neutral. He laughed, patted the edge of my desk once, and walked away. Over the next few days it happened twice more. Small comments, always deniable, always carrying the same subtext. She must have lost a bet. What's she doing with a guy like you? Each one landed the way they were designed to land, not hard enough to make a formal complaint about, just hard enough to make you feel it. I filed every one of them in the same place I filed everything about Dennis. Quietly, completely, and I watched him put the next business trip on his calendar. The one that would take him to her office. Maya called me on a Wednesday evening, 3 days after Dennis's trip. I could tell from the first 2 words that something had happened. She told me carefully, in the way people tell things they have been rehearsing, what Dennis had done. He had approached her at the other office professionally at first, a meeting about something work-related, all very appropriate on the surface. Then, at the end of a day, in a hallway with no one else around, he had made it clear what he actually wanted. He had been smooth about it, she said, which somehow made it worse. Not aggressive. Practiced. The ease of someone who had done this many times and expected it to work. She had said no. Clearly, directly, no ambiguity. Dennis had smiled and said something like, "No problem at all. Let me know if you change your mind," and walked away as though nothing had happened. She said the walk away was the part that frightened her most, the absolute confidence of it, the complete absence of embarrassment or recalibration. He had heard no and processed it as not yet. I sat with the phone pressed against my ear and felt something move through me that I do not have a precise word for. It was rage, and it was helplessness, and it was the specific cold clarity of understanding that someone had decided to use the person I loved as a move in a game he was playing against me. She had not been a target because of anything she had done. She had been a target because Dennis had seen me happy at a party and could not let that stand. She begged me not to say anything, not to escalate, not to go to HR, not to confront Dennis. She knew how this worked. She knew what happened to the person who caused a scene about the untouchable manager, and she was not prepared to be that person. She had a job she valued, a career she was building, and she needed me to let it go. She said, "Please, Daniel, just let it go." I told her I would. I meant it when I said it. I was also, from that moment, a completely different kind of angry than I had been before. About 3 weeks later, Dennis was in the men's room. I was walking past and the door was open and I could see him at the sink, washing his hands, looking at himself in the mirror the way Dennis always looked at himself in the mirror, like he was confirming something. I had a paper cup of water in my hand from the cooler near my desk. I looked at him. I looked at the cup. I looked at him again. I threw the water through the open door, turned around, and walked back to my desk at a normal pace. Behind me, I heard a sound of surprise and then silence. I sat down, opened a document, and stared at it without reading a single word. My heart was hammering. I was 31 years old, and I had just thrown water at my manager through a bathroom door like I was in the 7th grade. It was the best I had felt in 3 weeks. Dennis had no idea who had done it. He came back to the floor damp and visibly irritated, asked a few general questions that didn't go anywhere, and eventually let it drop. I watched him from my desk and kept my face exactly still. Some things are small and childish and completely necessary. That was one of them. The call came on a Friday afternoon. Maya's voice was flat in the way voices get when the person has already done the crying and is now just delivering information. She had been let go. Performance issues, that was the language in the termination notice. Attitude concerns. A pattern of behavior inconsistent with company expectations. All of it vague, all of it carefully worded. None of it attached to anything specific enough to grab onto. She had never had a negative performance review. Not one. In 3 years at that company, she had been reviewed 4 times, and every review had been positive, some of them glowing. The termination notice described a person who did not resemble any version of Maya that existed in any document the company had ever produced about her. We talked to a lawyer. We built what case we could, the clean review history, the timeline, the fact that the termination came less than 2 months after Dennis's visit to her office. The lawyer was measured. She said the circumstantial case was real, but that circumstantial cases against a manager with a documented paper trail were difficult. And Dennis had a paper trail. Whatever he had filed, whatever reasons he had constructed, they were credible enough to survive scrutiny. He had prepared for this. He had known what he was going to do before he did it, and he had built the cover before he needed it. The wrongful termination route went nowhere. We spent money and time and hope on it and came away with nothing. I sat in my car outside the lawyer's office on the day she told us there was not enough to proceed, and I stared through the windshield at a parking garage wall for a long time. Then I drove back to the office. I walked in. Dennis was standing near the coffee station talking to someone, and when he saw me, he did something that I think about every time this story comes up. He looked at me, and he smiled. Not a big smile. Not a performance. Just a small, settled, private smile that said, "I know what I did, and I know you cannot do anything about it, and we both know it." That smile. That specific smile. My friend Marcus was beside me. I do not remember deciding anything. I remember my body moving and Marcus's hand on my arm, and Marcus saying quietly but with real force, "Don't. Just don't. He's not worth your job. He wins if you do this." I stood there. Dennis held the smile for 1 more second, then turned back to his conversation. I walked to my desk. I sat down. and I started thinking about Pete's story. I went home that night and I thought about it properly for the first time. Not as gossip, not as office mythology, as a real possibility about a real person whose behavior I had been observing for 2 years. Dennis was a man who needed an audience for everything. His management style was about visibility. He needed people to see him in control. His social behavior was about visibility. The comments at my desk after the party were about making sure I knew he had noticed Maya, making sure I felt the implication of that. Everything Dennis did was performed for someone. He did not do things privately. He did not do things quietly. He collected and displayed. A man like that, who had been unfaithful for years, who had, if Pete was right, documented those encounters and shown the documentation around to selected people, that man did not throw those photographs away. Throwing them away would mean letting go of them. It would mean admitting they were evidence of something he should be ashamed of rather than proud of. Dennis was not ashamed of anything. Dennis was proud of everything. He kept them because keeping them was another form of control, another private performance, another way of saying, look what I have, look what I do, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. And he kept them at the office because home was Sandra. Home was the one place where the performance had to stop. I thought about his office. I thought about the desk. I thought about what it would take to get in there alone with enough time and enough cover to go through it properly. I thought about the cleaning crew, which came through on weekday evenings and on Saturday mornings when overtime was scheduled. I thought about the fact that cleaning staff unlocked every office in the building as part of their rounds. I was not ready to act yet, but I was done dismissing the rumor. 3 months later, I was working a Saturday overtime shift. The building was quiet, a handful of people scattered across different floors, nobody paying close attention to anyone else. The cleaning crew arrived mid-morning. I watched from my desk as the cleaner moved through the office, unlocking doors, doing her work, moving methodically from room to room. She unlocked Dennis's office. She went in, spent about 10 minutes inside, then came out with her cart and headed in the direction of the accounting department. As she passed me, she asked, without really stopping, if I could close up Dennis's office when I was done in there. I was not in there. I had not been in there. She had simply assumed, in the way that cleaning staff reasonably assume about the people they see sitting at desks near open offices on Saturday mornings, that I had a reason to be in the vicinity. I said sure. I gave it 2 minutes. Then I walked in. I moved the way I had thought about moving, unhurried, purposeful, the body language of someone who belongs somewhere. I had a rolled drawing under my arm. I spread it on Dennis's desk and looked at it as though I was checking measurements, as though this was a completely normal thing to be doing in my manager's office on a Saturday morning. If anyone had looked in through the glass, I was a person doing their job. I stayed in that posture for 30 seconds. Then I went through the desk. Top drawers first. Office supplies, files, nothing. Middle drawers, documents, folders, a spare phone charger. I moved to the bottom drawer on the right side, the deep one, and pulled it all the way open. Files stacked in the front. Behind the files, pushed to the very back of the drawer, a manila envelope. I opened it. The photographs were printed on standard photo paper, the kind you get from a drugstore or an online print service, good quality, clear, color. I did not count them in the office. I estimated 4 inches of stack, which is a meaningful number of photographs. I looked at the top 3 long enough to confirm what I was looking at and to confirm what Pete had told me was true. Dennis's face was visible. The women had dark or red hair. I put the envelope under the drawing I was carrying, rolled everything together, walked out, closed the door behind me, and went back to my desk. I sat there for a few minutes. My hands were completely steady. I had not expected them to be steady, but they were. I finished the work I had come in to do. Then I went home. I went through them that evening at my kitchen table. 41 photographs total. Dennis's face clearly visible in every one. For different women across what appeared to be several years, based on the varying backgrounds and what Dennis was wearing. All 4 women had dark or red hair. Sandra was blonde. I selected 12. The 12 where Dennis was most clearly identifiable, the 12 that showed the clearest range of women and timeframes, the 12 that told the most complete story. I put the rest in a bag and dealt with them separately. I was not going to keep them, and I was not going to leave them anywhere they could be found. I put the 12 in an envelope. I did not write a return address. I did not include a note. There was nothing to explain. The photographs explained themselves. I sealed it. Then I waited. Dennis had another out-of-town trip coming up in 3 weeks. I wanted him away from home when the envelope arrived. I wanted Sandra to open it without Dennis in the house, without the opportunity for him to manage the situation in real time, without the performance he would certainly mount if he were present. I wanted her to have the photographs and the time to look at them and the space to decide what to do next before he had any idea what was happening. 3 weeks later, on the second day of his trip, I drove to the town where Dennis and Sandra lived. I found the post office closest to their house. I mailed the envelope. I drove home. I made dinner. I watched something on television and went to bed and slept better than I had in months. The divorce was not quiet. I heard about it in pieces, through the network of information that moves through any organization when something significant is happening to one of its employees, through Pete who knew everything, through the particular change in Dennis's energy that you could read in the way he moved through the office in the weeks that followed. He came back from his trip to something he had not prepared for, and whatever composure he normally maintained developed visible cracks. Sandra had a good lawyer. The settlement was, by the accounts that filtered through, thorough. The house, significant assets, financial consequences that Dennis would be managing for years. He had built a comfortable life on 2 incomes and on the particular confidence of a man who believed he was insulated from consequence, and that life was now being divided by a legal process that did not care about his confidence or his untouchability. He kept his job. I want to be clear about that. The divorce cost him enormously, but it did not cost him his position at the company. He came in every day, diminished and visibly stressed, but present. Still my manager. Still the same person operating in the same role, just without the domestic stability he had taken for granted. I watched him navigate this period with something close to professional detachment. I was sorry for what Sandra was going through. I was not sorry for what Dennis was going through, and I was not done. The moral clause in our employment contracts was not decorative. I knew this because I had read the contract carefully when I filed my own relationship disclosure paperwork. The clause covered conduct that brought the company into disrepute, conduct that violated the company's stated values around respect and professionalism, and specifically conduct of a sexual nature that occurred in connection with the employee's professional role, or that involved other employees or professional contacts. Dennis had been showing photographs of his extramarital sexual activity to employees on the production floor. I could not prove this with testimony. Nobody was going to come forward voluntarily to confirm they had been shown the photos. But I did not need testimony. I needed a description specific enough to trigger an investigation. HR would do the rest. I created an anonymous email account on a personal device, on a network that was not connected to the company or to anything in my name. I wrote a careful, specific, factual description of what Dennis had been doing with the photographs, the nature of the content, the fact that he kept them at the office, the fact that he had shown them to colleagues. I did not attach any images. I did not need to. I described them in enough detail that any HR professional reading the email would understand immediately what the liability exposure was and what they needed to do about it. I sent it. I closed the account. I went back to work. The investigation took about 3 weeks. I watched it happen from a careful distance, the HR conversations that Dennis did not know I could see happening through glass walls, the shift in how certain people interacted with him, the particular quiet that descended around his office during the second week. Dennis did not know what was coming. He had survived so many things for so long that I think he had stopped seriously believing that something could catch him. He had forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, that the reason nothing had caught him before was not that he was untouchable. It was that nobody had known exactly where to look. I was at my desk on a Thursday morning when Dennis walked through the office carrying a box. That walk. I have thought about it many times and I think about it still. There is a specific quality to the walk of someone who has just been fired and is carrying their belongings out of a place they expected to occupy indefinitely. Something in the posture. Something in the way the eyes move, forward, fixed, not engaging with anything on either side. Because engaging means acknowledging and acknowledging means feeling it fully, and there will be time for that later, privately, but not here, not in front of these people. Dennis walked the way people walk when they are concentrating very hard on simply continuing to move. Every head in the office turned. Some people looked away quickly. Some watched openly. I watched openly. He had to pass my desk to reach the exit. I had known this. I had been sitting there since 8 in the morning with the specific awareness of someone waiting for something they have been waiting a long time for. As he came level with my desk, I looked up. I said, quietly and clearly, exactly what he had said to me the morning after the company party. Word for word. The same tone, as close as I could get it. What did you do? Get her drunk. Dennis stopped. It was involuntary. His body stopped before his face decided what to do. He looked at me. I held his gaze without expression. Something moved across his face that I had never seen on Dennis before and that I do not have a clean word for. It was recognition, and it was something like fear, and it was the specific look of a person who has just understood something they cannot do anything about. He looked at me for 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Then he kept walking. The exit door opened and closed behind him. I turned back to my screen. I heard about Dennis over the following year or so through the usual channels: people who had left the company and stayed connected, industry contacts, Pete who maintained his information network even after Dennis was gone as a matter of personal principle. The picture that assembled itself was consistent. Dennis landed at another company, smaller, less prestigious, a title that sounds equivalent but a room that is clearly smaller. He lasted about 14 months. The pattern was familiar to anyone who had worked for him. After that, a gap and then a role at a company smaller still. Last anyone heard, he was in a position that nobody at our old office would have recognized as something he would have accepted 5 years earlier. A long way from the untouchable manager who smiled at the people he had hurt because there was nothing they could do. There was something they could do. It just took time. About 6 weeks after Dennis left, my manager's manager called me in for a conversation. He said the team needed stability and continuity. He said my performance over the past several years had been consistently strong. He said they had been thinking about the right person to step into the role, and they wanted to talk to me about whether I was interested. I told him I was interested. I have Dennis's old office now. The desk is different. I replaced it in the first week, which felt important in a way I did not need to analyze. The room is the same room. The window looks out over the same part of the floor where I used to sit and watch him operate and file things away and wait. I sit in it every day and I do the job the way I think a manager should do it, which is to say, I try to be the opposite of Dennis in every way that matters. Maya is my wife. We got married 2 years after everything happened, in a small ceremony with people who actually mattered to us, on a Saturday in October when the weather was perfect, and she wore something that made me stand in a doorway again like an idiot, and she laughed at my expression again like the first time. I think about the patience sometimes, about what it cost to sit on all of it, the rage, the helplessness, the smile, the months of watching Dennis operate as though nothing had changed. People talk about revenge like it is something hot, something fast. But the version that actually works, where you walk away with everything and the other person walks out with a box, that requires the opposite of heat. It requires staying cold, keeping your job, not tipping your hand, trusting that the moment will come if you are patient enough to reach it. The rumor Pete told me in the break room turned out to be the truest thing anyone in that office ever said. Dennis thought he was untouchable. He had a drawer full of evidence that proved he wasn't. He just never imagined that someone would be patient enough to wait for a Saturday morning and a cleaning lady who assumed the wrong thing, and that the thing he had kept because he could not bear to let go of it would be the exact thing that finally, thoroughly, and permanently brought him down. I am not angry anymore. I have not been angry for a long time. I have a good job and a good office and a wife who still makes me stand in doorways and a life that is, by every measure that matters, exactly what I wanted it to be. It just required waiting for it. Update: a few things people asked about that I want to address. Several people asked whether I was ever suspected in any of this. The honest answer is I do not know, and I do not particularly care because there was nothing connecting me to any of it. The envelope had no return address and was mailed from a town I had no documented reason to visit. The email came from an account on a device and network with nothing in my name. The photographs were gone. What remained was an anonymous tip that HR was obligated to investigate, and an investigation that found what it found on its own. Nobody ever asked me a question. A few people asked about Maya, whether she knew the full story. She knows Dennis got what was coming to him. She knows about the divorce and the firing. She does not know the specific sequence that connected those outcomes. I have decided I am comfortable with that. Some things are yours. Dennis walked out of that building and will never know who did it. That is mine. I am keeping it. One more thing. A lot of people in the comments asked about Sandra, whether she was okay, what happened to her. From what I heard through the network, Sandra landed well. She kept her job at the company, got through the divorce with good legal representation, and by all accounts rebuilt her life without Dennis in it in a way that looked, from the outside, like relief more than grief. She deserved better than what she had for a long time. I am glad she eventually got it. If this one stayed with you, and I think it did, you know what to do. Subscribe to the Story Zone, drop a like, and tell me in the comments. What was your moment in this story? Was it the party and the look Dennis gave Maya across that room? Was it the morning after comments and what they told you about who Dennis really was? Was it the cup of water, small, childish, and completely necessary? Was it the smile Dennis gave him outside the lawyer's office? The Saturday morning and the drawer? The envelope mailed from the post office closest to their house? The box walk and the 4 words he said as Dennis passed? Or was it just the last line, I have Dennis's old office now? Drop it below. We see every comment. We will see you in the next one.